Welcome to Roundtable Decision. I am your host, Wyatt Birkenoff, and for today's video we're going to talk about July 4th, the Independence Day of our country. So to start with, I was just going to show some updates around President Trump's 4th of July celebration, as well as some other celebrations that are happening around the world. And I was going to talk about some common theme I see coming up about July 4th, what I think is outright wrong. So just some images of July 4th celebrations as we can see here. This appears to be a run or a fundraising event for July 4th, as a lot of these parades are. But the real event was Donald Trump is hosting a July 4th celebration, including tanks. And it's made some very recent news in the past about some people calling out Trump that tanks are ridiculous. But let's see this video here and what it talks about Trump's celebration for July 4th at the White House. If it will load.
Data is constantly growing. You need storage solutions that help you manage, protect, and get the most out of your company's data. Choose storage solutions you can trust, so you can focus on what's next.
So the video's playing here, and I'll full screen it. 4th of July festivals in Washington, D.C. This year, President Donald Trump has changed it up. And now it's loading. Trump's speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial. In the past, the Lincoln Memorial was open to the public for fireworks viewing. 2. Moving the fireworks. Because of the Lincoln Memorial event, the fireworks show moves from the Flexion Pool to West Providence Park along the patriotism with politics. Usually the National Mall is open. This year, 15,000 tickets are being issued, including 500 VIPs and some tickets given to RNC. A nearby protest will include an inflatable balloon representing Donald Trump as a baby. 4. The Navy's elite Blue Angels and Air Force One fly over. The Salute to America event focuses on the 5 armed service branches. The Navy will be joined by another aircraft, including a helicopter and 747 armed vehicles on display. The armed vehicles will not move to reduce the changes to damage to roads. 6. DC airspace will be closed twice on the 4th, moving the firework display's launch site among the river and adding the aircraft flyovers means new restrictions. The last DC airspace was closed was in 2015. 7. Money diverted to cover cost. The National Park Service will need to redirect at least $2.5 million from funds earmarked to remove parks to help. So that was a claim CNN was making, that the money was coming out of the National Park Service. And obviously I haven't followed that story very closely, and it doesn't really need to be followed that closely in my opinion. Now obviously some people might find that as being disturbing and other things, but really July 4th needs to be focused on why it's an important holiday, or why it's an important event, that it is the independence of our country. And I thought I would share Stephen Ignoramus, who is a fellow YouTuber and also has a Discord I would highly recommend joining. And I'll link his Discord to this video, and you can join it through there. But essentially, he was at the DC event.
Was just out there interviewing people, shooting some video around the White House. Got some of the parade in there. Happy Independence Day to everyone out there. I got messed up by the rain. It was really a shame because I was talking to, there was a little group discussion going on outside of the White House, a little anti-extremism, you could say anti-horseshoe theory discussion going on out there with the guy with the GoPro and a megaphone, and a couple people from both sides of the spectrum talking things out. I don't know, I just figured I'd make a quick video in the car, post it on Twitter, YouTube, things like that. I don't know, I'm going to wait here until the rain passes, and then I'm going to go back out there and try to interview some more people, and I will catch the fireworks and the festivities tonight downtown in DC.
So yeah, I would recommend going onto his YouTube channel later to see some of these interviews and videos of the actual DC parade and event, as Steven lives in the DC area. But another theme what I mentioned was that a lot of people seem to be referencing the enslaved Africans with the Independence Day, and that we should be ashamed of that fact, and that we should hold that against the movement of 4th of July. So one guy I commented on, he had this to say: many white Americans still refuse to believe that the Founding Fathers, while professing that all men were created equal, were building a country on slavery and genocide. Hashtag happy 4th of July. So I had this comment to reply back to him, and I said, how brainwashed can you be to say a claim like that? Many founding fathers were anti-slavery, such as Benjamin Rush, John Adams, Samuel Adams, and Thomas Paine, who never owned slaves. Ben Rush actually trained blacks to be his aide and future doctors. It was highly debated. So Benjamin Rush was a huge proponent of anti-slavery, and he said in many times in history that blacks had the same intelligence as whites. Black men had the same intelligence as black men had the same intelligence as white men, and he was very famous for saying that. And I had to make a presentation for school, and in this presentation for history class I had to make, as it had to be a practice test, because I'm thinking of being a history teacher, so I had to represent something. And Benjamin Rush was one person I covered, and he was a signer of this Declaration of Independence and the rights what were in it. And he claimed that the Declaration didn't have any room for slavery because he wanted them to end slavery right there. And obviously we all know that slavery wasn't ended right there, even though they said that all men were created equal. But if you ask a reasonable historian, they say that this was because they were afraid that if they were to outlaw it immediately, that the country would be completely divided into 13 colonies, or half non-slave and half slaves, similar to what it was before the Civil War, with the South having its own similar type of government. And as you can see at the bottom, he opened his office to black patients and doctors. So essentially he gave aid to black patients, and he allowed people to train under him to become doctors who were black or African American. And let alone, you also have to remember that a lot of Irish people were indentured servants, and those indentured servants were white, and although they had limited terms for their slavery, they still get their terms continued. So essentially it was still a form of slavery, what was white and black. And again, slavery is not something we should be proud of as a nation, but at the same time we should accept that we had it and that it's now fixed. We should be honored that our country was able to remove slavery, even though the founding fathers had slavery still included. But you could argue that many of the founding fathers didn't necessarily want slavery to continue. And another person was very well known who battled the idea of slavery was John Witherspoon. And he battled the idea from more of a religious perspective, as he was a doctor and a highly elite educated man. And he had a lot to say about slavery. And although he still had slaves, they were more of a butler type of role. And you could argue that that is still a form of slavery, but it's a better form of slavery, as they were treated very nicely because they were their butler, and they were tasked to treat each other as equals almost, even though that was a form of slavery. So the idea of slavery was highly debated at the time of writing the Constitution and writing the Declaration of Independence. So it's not like all the founding fathers were pro-slavery, and many of them were actually not pro-slavery. As you could see, according to Wikipedia, these people here, well, we all know Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Jay, Samuel Adams, and John Adams had slaves. And famously, George Washington released his slaves. Well, when he died, and his wife, he had a contract where the slaves had to be with his family until his wife died. But once he died, his wife ended up letting all the slaves go. But a lot of these people were not necessarily pro-slavery as you would think of it as today, essentially. So what I'm trying to say is they were very much against slavery, and Samuel Adams and John Adams were both against slavery their entire lives. They refused to have slaves, and they thought that form of slavery was outright harsh. So this was highly debated. So saying that they allowed slavery to exist is outright wrong. And I argued that allowing this thought to exist in your mind over July 4th and the independence of a country is the wrong way to think about independence. And yes, we should question what we know about our nation. We should question the history. History should be questioned and history should be improved on. History should not be changed is the thing we need to be concerned. We should know that slavery existed under the Founding Fathers, but we should also know that slavery was highly battled between all the Founding Fathers. And it's rather remarkable that the Founding Fathers at this time in history were battling the idea of slavery, as many other nations before them, such as Egyptians, Greece, Romans, even the Bible had a form of slavery when the Jews were slaves to the Egyptians. So again, this goes back way back in time. And the conquistadors with Spain were very famous for their slavery. It was a very harsh form of slavery where essentially you were worked to death. And even though the South in America might have had that type of form of slavery in some states, again, independence should be a day of honoring the nation. Yes, you should think about the nation you live in. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but your main focus should be on what's good about the United States. The United States is the land of opportunity. It's the land of dreams. It is why there are so many people that live here. It is why Texas and many other states are melting pots and not just consist of one type of person or one type of race or one type of ideology. It's a mixed bag. It's a melting pot. And that is a very good thing. And that's what makes the United States a very different type of nation. We have freedom of speech. We have the right to bear arms. We have the right to a fair trial. We have the right to remain silent. We have all these things that were fundamental to how nations are formed. And many nations look at the United States for guidance. It is why the United States is so hated by many other nations, because they want to be us, but they can't because the way they're structured to can't happen. So essentially, a lot of other nations have a government where it won't allow that to happen. But again, the United States is the land of opportunity. It is why a lot of people argue that we have an immigration problem, because many people want to come into the United States to have a better opportunity, to have a better life. Even though it may be hard and might be difficult, there is still a chance to have a better life. That is what we should be proud of. We should be proud as Americans on Independence Day and not angry. Thank you for watching.